You think you know someone after 37 years of marriage. You think you've seen all their secrets, heard all their stories, held all their truths in your hands. But Rowan Cade learned differently when her husband died and left her a cabin she'd almost forgotten existed. Deep in Montana's Bitterroot Mountains, the old log structure waited, cold, weathered, and full of things she'd never seen before. Notebooks in his handwriting, locked drawers, radio equipment that still hummed with electricity. Her husband had been keeping secrets, and now she was alone with them in the snow. What had he been hiding all those years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when they buried Malcolm Cade. Rowan stood under a black umbrella at the cemetery in Brookings, Oregon, watching water stream off the canvas, covering his casket. 62 years old, and she'd never felt more alone. The turnout was respectable. Library patrons where she worked part-time, neighbors from their street, a few of Malcolm's old fishing buddies. Her daughter Tenley stood beside her, dry-eyed and distant, holding her own umbrella. They hadn't spoken more than necessary in months. The pastor said something about Malcolm's quiet kindness, his skilled hands, his love of the outdoors. All true, all inadequate. How do you sum up 37 years in 20 minutes? How do you explain a man who could spend an entire evening in comfortable silence, whose laughter came rarely but meant everything when it did, who built furniture so perfect it seemed to grow from the wood itself? Rowan's fingers worried the wedding band on her left hand, worn smooth by decades of wear. Malcolm had slipped it on her finger in 1988, both of them so young they could barely afford the rings. She'd been 25, working at a bookstore. He'd been 27, fresh out of the army, learning carpentry. They'd met at a community college class, Philosophy 101. He'd been the quiet one in back, who only spoke when he had something worth saying. That first year of marriage, they'd dreamed big dreams on small paychecks. Malcolm talked about building their own place someday, somewhere with trees and space and silence. He'd grown up in Montana, missed the mountains with an ache he couldn't quite explain. Rowan had never been west of Ohio before meeting him, but his stories painted pictures: alpine meadows, cold streams, peaks that scraped the sky. They'd bought land together in 1990, 5 acres in the Bitterroot Mountains, a 2-day drive from their apartment in Washington State, where Malcolm had found steady work. The plan was simple: build a cabin over summers, move there when they retired. Malcolm had drawn sketches, calculated lumber costs, marked trees that would need clearing, but life happened the way it does. Tenley arrived in 1990, unexpected and perfect. The Montana land became a distant dream. They moved to Oregon for Malcolm's job at a high-end furniture maker. The cabin plans went into a drawer. They visited the Montana property once, maybe twice. Then years passed without mentioning it. Rowan had assumed they'd sold it, or let it go for back taxes. Malcolm handled the finances, the paperwork, the practical details. She'd never asked. The funeral ended. People filed past, offering condolences that blurred together. Tenley left early, claiming she needed to get back to Seattle for work. The hug they shared felt obligatory, distant. Something had broken between them years ago. Rowan couldn't pinpoint exactly when or why, only that her daughter had grown cold and unreachable. Gail stayed. Gail Pritchett, Rowan's best friend since they'd met at the library 15 years ago. 64 years old, retired postal worker, blunt as a hammer and twice as reliable. She drove Rowan home, helped her out of the black dress, made tea neither of them drank. "You going to be all right?" Gail asked, sitting in Malcolm's recliner. It still held the shape of him. "I don't know," Rowan said honestly. "We'd been growing apart. The last few years he was distant. Gone a lot. Said he was fishing, camping, needed space. I thought maybe there was someone else. Was there?" "I don't think so." "The lawyer would have mentioned it." Rowan stared at her tea. "But something was going on. I could feel it." 3 days after the funeral, Malcolm's lawyer called. Rowan almost didn't answer. She'd been sitting on the couch in sweatpants, staring at nothing, wondering how to start the impossible task of sorting through a dead man's belongings. "Mrs. Cade, this is Robert Chen, your late husband's attorney. I have some materials to go over with you regarding the estate." The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. Rowan drove to the lawyer's office in downtown Brookings, a small suite above a coffee shop. Mr. Chen was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and careful hands that moved precisely over documents. "Your husband's estate is straightforward," he explained. "The house is paid off, jointly owned, now entirely yours. There's a modest life insurance policy, about $50,000. His pension from the furniture company will transfer to survivor benefits. And there's this." He slid a document across the desk. "A property deed, 5 acres in Ravalli County, Montana. Current taxes paid through the end of the year." Rowan stared at the paper. "I thought we'd lost this. We bought it in 1990 and I haven't thought about this place in 20 years. "Your husband maintained it," Mr. Chen said carefully. "Paid the taxes annually. According to his instructions, the property transfers entirely to you. He also left this, an envelope," her name in Malcolm's handwriting. Rowan's hands shook as she opened it. The letter was brief. "Rowan, by the time you read this, you'll know about the Montana property. I've been going there. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. If you want to understand, you'll need to go there yourself. The cabin has answers I couldn't give you in person. I love you." "I'm sorry, Malcolm. There's a cabin." Rowan looked up at Mr. Chen. "Apparently. Your husband filed permits for construction about 15 years ago. Utilities are minimal. Solar panels, well water. He had supplies delivered periodically through a local service." Mr. Chen paused. "Mrs. Cade, I don't know what you'll find there, but your husband was very specific that you should visit if you wanted to. He left funds specifically for travel expenses." Rowan drove home in a daze. Malcolm had been going to Montana. For how long? How often? The fishing trips, the camping weekends, the times he'd said he needed space. Had he been going to the cabin the whole time? She called Tenley that evening. The conversation was brief, strained. He had a cabin in Montana. Tenley's voice was flat. "Did you know?" "No. Are you going?" "I think I have to." "Why?" "He's dead, Mom. What difference does it make where he was going?" "It matters to me." Silence on the line. "Then do what you want." "I have to go." The call ended. Rowan sat holding the phone, feeling the distance between them like a physical weight. Gail was more supportive. "You should go," she said when Rowan explained everything. "You need closure. You need to understand what he was doing. Maybe then you can start processing the grief. It's November. Winter's coming in Montana. Then don't stay long. Drive up, look around, come home, but go." 2 days later, Rowan packed her truck. Practical things: winter clothes, boots, a sleeping bag, non-perishable food. Malcolm's favorite flannel shirt, the red one that still smelled faintly of him. A photo album from their early years, before distance grew between them. Her phone, charger, a road atlas because cell service might be unreliable. The drive took 2 days. Oregon coast to inland valleys, then north through Idaho into Montana. The landscape changed mile by mile, rain to snow, green to white, coastal dampness to mountain cold. Rowan drove through small towns that looked frozen in time, past forests so dense they seemed impenetrable, alongside rivers running fast and clear. The property was remote. The GPS struggled for the last 20 miles. She followed directions Mr. Chen had provided, turning onto a barely maintained Forest Service road, then onto a track that was more suggestion than path. Snow had started falling, light but persistent. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a dream. Not the half-finished structure she'd imagined, but a complete log home. Small, maybe 800 square feet, but solid. Solar panels on the roof. A woodshed fully stocked. A small generator housing. Malcolm had built this. Actually finished it. Rowan parked and sat in the truck for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled. The silence was profound. No traffic, no neighbors, just wind through pine trees and snow falling on snow. She got out. The cold hit her immediately, sharp and clean. The cabin door was locked. The key was where Malcolm's letter said it would be, under the third stone to the left of the front step. Inside, the cabin was warmer than outside, but still cold. Rowan flipped a light switch experimentally. Nothing. The solar system probably needed charging, or there was a breaker somewhere she'd need to find. But daylight through the windows showed the interior clearly enough. One main room, kitchen area with a propane stove, small wooden table, comfortable seating around a wood stove. A bedroom area behind a partial wall. Bathroom with composting toilet and a shower that probably ran on propane heat. Everything simple, functional, beautiful. Malcolm's craftsmanship was evident in every joint, every fitted board, but it was the details that made Rowan's breath catch. This wasn't a hunting cabin or a bachelor's retreat. This was lived in, regularly maintained, clean dish. In the drying rack, canned goods organized in the cupboard. Books on a shelf, field guides, wilderness survival, books about Montana history. A calendar on the wall with dates marked, some as recent as 2 months ago. Malcolm's last visit before he died, Rowan moved through the space like she was walking through someone else's dream. She recognized some things. A quilt she'd made years ago folded on the bed. A photograph of her and Malcolm from their wedding day, framed on the small desk. His favorite coffee mug, but there were things she didn't recognize. A sophisticated radio setup on the desk, far more complex than a simple ham radio. Topographical maps covering one wall, marked with symbols and notations she didn't understand. Binoculars, professional grade. A camera with a telephoto lens. Filing boxes under the desk, labeled with years, and in the corner, a locked metal filing cabinet. Rowan stood in the center of the cabin as snow fell outside and darkness gathered. Her husband had built a life here, a separate life she'd known nothing about. The betrayal felt physical, a weight in her chest, but underneath the hurt was curiosity. What had Malcolm been doing here? Why the secrecy? What was in that locked cabinet? She found firewood and kindling, got the wood stove going with matches from the kitchen. Heat began to fill the space. She located the electrical panel, flipped the right switches, and lights came on. The solar system still had charge. Rowan made tea on the propane stove and sat at Malcolm's desk, looking at the radio equipment she didn't know how to use. Outside, night had fallen completely. The silence was so deep it almost rang. She was alone in the Montana wilderness, in a cabin her dead husband had built without telling her, surrounded by mysteries she didn't understand. Tomorrow she'd start looking for answers. Tonight she'd just sit in the warmth and try to understand how her life had led to this moment. Malcolm's coffee mug sat on the desk. Rowan picked it up, ran her fingers over the smooth ceramic. He'd held this, drunk from it, sat at this desk doing what? She'd come here looking for closure. Instead, she'd found only questions. But maybe questions were a place to start. Morning came cold and bright. Rowan woke in Malcolm's bed under the quilt she'd made, feeling disoriented. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The cabin, Montana, Malcolm's secrets. She dressed in layers and stood at the window, drinking instant coffee. The forest stretched endlessly, snow-covered and still. No roads visible, no other buildings. Just wilderness. After breakfast, Rowan began her exploration in earnest. She started methodically, the way Malcolm would have. Kitchen cupboards first, organized, well-stocked. Canned vegetables, dried goods, coffee, tea. Enough for extended stays. The propane tank outside was 3/4 full. The woodshed held 2 cords at least. Malcolm had prepared for winter here. The bookshelf revealed more. Field guides to Montana flora and fauna. Books on wilderness survival, tracking, orienteering. A worn copy of Army Field Manual on land navigation. That made sense. Malcolm had served in the army before they'd met. But why would he need this here? The maps on the wall were more puzzling. Topographical maps of the surrounding region, marked with hand-drawn symbols. Circles, X's, lines connecting points. Dates written in Malcolm's precise hand. Some recent, some years old. Rowan studied them but couldn't decipher the meaning. She took photos with her phone, though she had no signal to send them anywhere. The filing boxes under the desk were labeled by year, starting 15 years ago. Rowan pulled out the earliest box and found it full of notebooks. She opened one at random and found Malcolm's handwriting, journal entries dated and detailed. June 15th, 2010. Arrived at cabin for summer stay. Repairs needed. Roof leak in northwest corner. Chimney needs cleaning. Saw elk herd passing through at dawn. 23 head. Weather clear, mundane observations. But as she flipped forward, the entries became more specific. July 2nd, 2010. Notice tracks on the North Trail that don't match normal patterns. Boot prints recent. 6 different treads. People moving through deliberately, avoiding main paths. Marked location on map. Rowan felt her heartbeat quicken. Malcolm had been tracking people. Why? July 8th, 2010. Observed group of 4 men setting up camp in the restricted area near Sawmill Creek, well-equipped military-style gear. They're not hunters. Wrong season, wrong equipment. Took photos. We'll monitor. She flipped through more pages. The entries continued through that summer. Observations of unusual activity. People moving through wilderness areas where they shouldn't be. Patterns Malcolm was clearly documenting. Then, in August, met Buck Tremaine today. Former Army Ranger, lives 20 miles east. He's noticed the same patterns I have. We compared notes. He thinks we're seeing the edges of something organized. Agreed to stay in contact, Buck Tremaine. Rowan committed the name to memory. She pulled out more boxes, more notebooks. The years stacked up. Malcolm had been coming here regularly, weeks at a time, sometimes months. The entries grew more detailed, more focused. He'd developed a system, observation posts, documented routes, coordination with others. Names appeared repeatedly, Buck, Vincent, Kai, others, but the entries about Rowan appeared too, and they made her chest tight. September 20th, 2012. Called Rowan tonight. Told her I was at a fishing camp with no signal. The lie came easily. Too easily. She deserves better than this. But if she knew what I was seeing out here, she'd worry. She'd try to stop me. And this work, someone has to do it. Rowan set the notebook down, feeling sick. 3 years of lies, right there! And that was just one entry. She kept reading, driven by need to understand. The notebooks revealed a pattern. Malcolm had discovered illegal activity in the wilderness. Drug trafficking first, then something worse. People being moved through remote corridors, away from roads and authorities. Malcolm had started documenting everything, building a case, working with a network of others who'd noticed the same thing. April 3rd, 2015. Confirmed trafficking route. They move people through every 6 to 8 weeks. Always at night, always using the same wilderness corridors. Buck and I counted 15 people in the last convoy. Women mostly, some young men. They looked terrified. We radioed it in through Harwood's contact, but by the time anyone responded, they were gone. We need better evidence, Harwood. Another name. Rowan wrote it down. The locked filing cabinet sat there, taunting her. Whatever was inside, Malcolm had wanted it secured. She searched the cabin for a key. Drawers, shelves, under furniture, nothing. Then she remembered in their early marriage they'd hidden spare keys in a coffee can in the freezer. A little joke between them. The freezer was small, mostly empty, but there, behind a bag of frozen vegetables, was a coffee can. Rowan's hands shook as she opened it, 2 keys inside. One looked like it fit the filing cabinet. The other was smaller, for something else. Rowan stood in front of the cabinet for a long moment before inserting the key. The lock turned smoothly. The drawer slid open. Inside were more notebooks, but these were different. Leather-bound, numbered. She pulled out the first one and read the opening entry. January 1st, 1987. Starting this journal on Rowan's suggestion. She says writing helps process thoughts. I've never been good with words, but I'll try. New year, new job at the furniture company, new marriage. Life feels full of possibility. These were personal journals. Malcolm's inner thoughts spanning decades. Rowan sat on the floor with her back against the desk and began to read. The early entries were sweet. His thoughts about marriage, about building a life with her, about his hopes and fears. He wrote about his military service occasionally, always vaguely. Certain things I can't write about. Certain things I can't forget. He wrote about the Montana land they'd bought, his dreams of building there. Then Tenley was born, and the entries glowed with love and terror at being a father. Rowan found herself crying as she read his words about holding their daughter for the first time. But as the years progressed, the tone changed. Malcolm wrote about feeling disconnected from civilian life, missing the structure and purpose of his military years. He wrote about discovering the Montana cabin property while sorting paperwork, about making a solo trip to see it. June 1999. Went to Montana alone. Told Rowan I needed a camping trip. Truth is, I needed to see if that land was still ours, still waiting. It is. Standing there, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Purpose. Like this place was calling me to do something important. The next years documented his decision to build the cabin, to return regularly, to start paying attention to the wilderness around him. September 2008. Saw something on this trip I can't ignore. Group of men moving through at night, heavily armed, moving something. Drugs, I think. They were professional, organized. This isn't random. This is an operation. And if I can see it, others can too. But who's watching this far out? Who cares what happens in places nobody sees? That was the entry that changed everything. Malcolm had decided to become the Watcher. The journals documented his recruitment of others, former military, retired Forest Service, locals who cared about the land. They'd formed an informal network, a civilian surveillance operation with no official sanction. They watched the wilderness, documented criminal activity, and passed intelligence to authorities who were too understaffed to maintain a presence in remote areas. And they'd been doing it for 15 years. Rowan read about close calls, dangerous moments when Malcolm had observed armed traffickers and had to remain hidden. She read about small victories, operations disrupted by their intelligence, arrests made, routes abandoned. But she also read his guilt. May 2016. Told Rowan I was going fishing again. I'm becoming someone who lies easily and I hate it. But how do I explain this? How do I tell her I've spent years building a network to fight trafficking in the wilderness? How do I justify the risks without sounding crazy? She'd make me stop. She'd be right to. But I can't stop. Not when I know what I know. The most recent journal was thinner than the others. Rowan opened it carefully. January 2025. The doctor confirmed what I suspected. Heart failure advanced. 3 to 5 years, maybe less with stress. I should tell Rowan. I should stop the work, spend time with her, make things right. But there's something bigger happening now. New group moving through. More sophisticated than anything we've seen. Not just drugs, people, lots of them. And I'm the only one positioned to document it fully. If I stop now, they'll disappear into the system and no one will know. Rowan pressed her hand to her mouth. Malcolm had known he was dying, and he'd chosen to spend his final time here, chasing traffickers. Instead of with her, the last entry was dated 3 weeks before his death. Rowan, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found this place. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I chose this mission over transparency with you. I chose it knowing my time was limited. That was selfish, but I couldn't stop. The work was too important. Please understand, I loved you every day of our marriage. But I also loved this place, this purpose. I hope someday you'll see it the way I did. I hope you'll forgive me. The cabin is yours now. Everything I built here, the network, the mission, it continues without me. But you should know about it. You deserve to know all along. I love you, Malcolm. Rowan sat on the floor of the cabin, journals spread around her, and wept. Not quiet tears, but racking sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. Malcolm had lied to her for 15 years. He'd known he was dying and hadn't told her. He'd chosen this secret life over honesty, over time together, over everything she'd thought their marriage meant. But he'd also been doing something remarkable. Dangerous, yes. Secret, absolutely. But he'd been fighting to protect vulnerable people, to stop predators who operated where no one was watching. She didn't know whether to hate him or honor him. Maybe both. Her phone buzzed. She must have drifted into a spot with minimal signal. A text from Tenley. "Mom, are you okay? Should I be worried?" Rowan typed back with shaking hands. "I'm fine. Just processing. I'll call when I can." Another buzz, this time from Gail. "Check in, please. Let me know you're safe. Safe. Cabin is nice." Malcolm built something here. Still figuring out what. She couldn't explain the truth, not yet. Maybe not ever. As evening approached, Rowan heard an engine. She looked out the window and saw a truck pulling up. Old Chevy, Forest Service colors, but not official. An elderly man climbed out, moving carefully through the snow. Rowan opened the door as he approached. He stopped, clearly surprised to see her. "You must be Rowan," he said after a moment. His voice was gravelly, weathered. I'm Buck Tremaine. I knew Malcolm. Didn't expect to find you here. I didn't expect to be here. Rowan studied him. 70-something, lean, hard eyes that missed nothing. You should come in. Buck entered, cautiously removing his hat. He looked around the cabin like he was checking for changes. I'm sorry about Malcolm, he said finally. He was a good man. One of the best. You were part of his network. It wasn't a question. Buck's eyes sharpened. You've been reading his journals. I've been trying to understand what my husband was doing up here instead of being home with me. The bitterness in her voice was clear. Buck nodded slowly. He talked about you often. He felt guilty about the secrets. But he also felt called to the mission. Rowan's laugh was harsh. That's what the journals say. It's true, though. Buck sat down carefully. Malcolm saw things out here that most people never know about. Bad things. And he decided to do something about it. He built something important. He built a lie. He built both. Buck met her eyes. I won't pretend his choices were easy on you. They weren't. But what he did mattered. The network he created saved lives. Real people who would have disappeared into hell. Rowan wanted to argue, but the journals had shown her the same truth. Malcolm's work had made a difference. Why are you here? She asked, checking on the place. Malcolm usually came every few weeks. When he didn't show, I got worried. Then I heard... Buck paused. I'm sorry for your loss. I came to make sure the cabin was secure. Didn't know you'd be here. I'm trying to decide what to do with this place. Buck nodded. That's your right. But you should know the work continues. Malcolm's gone, but the network isn't. We're still watching. Still documenting. If you decide to sell, we'd understand. But if you want to keep it, you'd be welcome. As much or as little involvement as you want. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Malcolm said something once. Said if anything happened to him, you'd either understand completely or hate him completely. He hoped for understanding, but accepted either way. For what it's worth, he loved you. Never doubted that. After Buck left, Rowan stood at the window, watching darkness fall. She felt like she was standing at a crossroads. She could close up the cabin, go home, try to rebuild her life in Oregon, mourn the husband she thought she'd known and move forward, or she could stay. Learn more. Understand the full scope of what Malcolm had built. The locked drawer in the filing cabinet still held secrets. She'd only opened the top drawer. There was more to discover. Rowan touched the wedding ring on her finger, worn smooth by time. What were you thinking, Malcolm? She whispered to the empty cabin. But he wasn't there to answer. She'd have to find the answers herself. Rowan woke before dawn, the cabin cold despite the banked fire. She'd spent a restless night dreaming of Malcolm. Not the man she'd married, but the stranger from the journals. Tracking armed men through snow, radioing coded warnings. Living a life she'd never witnessed. She relit the wood stove and made coffee, watching the forest emerge from darkness. The isolation was profound. No neighbors, no traffic sounds, no human presence except the cabin itself. How had Malcolm endured this solitude for weeks at a time? Or had he preferred it? After breakfast, she returned to the filing cabinet. The second drawer held what Malcolm had called his operational files. Rowan spread them across the table. Maps marked with routes and dates, photographs of vehicles and people, detailed logs of observations. This wasn't casual documentation. This was intelligence work, organized and thorough. One folder contained a log of what Malcolm called corridor activity. He'd identified 6 main routes through the wilderness that traffickers used consistently. Each route was mapped precisely, with notes about timing, vehicle types, frequency. The most recent entries showed increased activity on what he'd labeled Northern Corridor Alpha. August 2024, NCA showing elevated traffic. 3 convoys this month versus typical 1. Personnel appear more professional than previous operations. Vehicles newer, better equipped. Coordination suggests larger organization. Recommend increased surveillance. But surveillance by whom? The network Buck had mentioned. Rowan found a list in another folder. Names, locations, call signs. Buck Tremaine, Eastern Position. Vincent Orr, Communications. Kai Hewitt, Northern Watch. 12 names total, each with a specific role. Malcolm had built a structured operation. She spent the morning reading through operational logs, piecing together how the network functioned. They communicated via radio on specific frequencies. They observed and documented, but avoided direct confrontation. They passed intelligence to law enforcement contacts, always anonymously. They were shadows, watching places where official authorities couldn't maintain constant presence. The scope of what Malcolm had organized was staggering. This wasn't a hobby or a retired man's project. This was a commitment that had consumed years of his life, and Rowan found references to herself scattered through the files, painful reminders of the lies Malcolm had told to maintain his cover. Cover story: fishing trip with the guys. Duration 10 days. Rowan's suspicious but accepted explanation. That was from 4 years ago. She remembered that trip. Malcolm had come home exhausted, distant. She thought maybe he was having an affair. The truth was somehow worse. He'd been spending 10 days watching traffickers instead of being honest with her. By midday, Rowan needed to move. She bundled up and stepped outside, following a path Malcolm had cleared through the snow. It led to a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was spectacular. Mountains layered to the horizon, forests stretching endlessly, sky so clear it hurt to look at. She understood why Malcolm loved this place. There was a purity to the silence, a sense of being part of something vast and ancient. But understanding didn't erase the betrayal. She was standing there when she heard an engine again. This time, a different vehicle, a small SUV, moving carefully up the rough track. Rowan felt a spike of alarm. Buck had said he'd check on the place, but this wasn't his truck. A woman climbed out, younger than Buck, maybe early 50s, dressed practically in winter gear. She spotted Rowan and raised a hand in greeting. "You must be Rowan Cade," she called. "I'm Kai Hewitt. I knew Malcolm." Rowan descended from the ridge carefully. Kai met her halfway, offering a firm handshake. "Buck radioed that you were here," Kai explained. "Thought I'd bring supplies. Figured you might be running low." She pulled boxes from her vehicle, fresh food, propane canisters, firewood. More than Rowan needed, but the gesture was kind. "You didn't have to do this," Rowan said. "Malcolm would have wanted us to look after you." Kai's smile was genuine. "Besides, we look after each other out here. That's how the network works." They carried supplies inside. Kai moved around the cabin like she'd been there before, which she probably had. "How well did you know my husband?" Rowan asked. "Pretty well last 10 years anyway. He recruited me." Kai settled at the table. "I worked social services before I burned out. Saw too many people fall through cracks. Too many vulnerable folks disappear into systems that didn't care. When Malcolm showed me what was happening in the wilderness, people being trafficked through corridors where nobody was watching, I couldn't turn away." "So you just joined his surveillance network?" "Not immediately. I thought he was paranoid at first, but he showed me the evidence. Drove me to observation points, let me see for myself. Once I knew, I couldn't unknow it. Someone had to pay attention." Kai spoke matter-of-factly, without drama. Rowan found herself appreciating the directness. "Malcolm wrote about you in his journals," Rowan said. "He called you patient. Said you had good instincts. He taught me most of what I know. Tracking, observation, how to document evidence properly, how to stay hidden when dangerous people are nearby." Kai paused. "He talked about you two a lot. He felt terrible about the secrets, but not terrible enough to stop lying." "No," Kai agreed. "The mission came first for him. That's hard on families, I get it, but what he built here, it matters. We've disrupted operations, saved people, made these mountains less safe for predators. That mattered to Malcolm more than anything." The words stung because they were true. Malcolm had chosen the mission over her, over them. "How does it work?" Rowan asked. "The network. How do you coordinate?" Kai brightened slightly. "Want me to show you?" She walked to the radio equipment, flipping switches with practiced ease. Static filled the room, then voices, brief coded transmissions. Guy explained the system. Scheduled check-ins, specific frequencies for different types of communication, code words for various situations. "We maintain watch on the primary corridors," Kai said. "Each position covers a sector. If someone spots unusual activity, they radio others. We coordinate observations, build complete pictures of operations before we pass intelligence to authorities." "Has anyone gotten hurt?" "Not seriously. We're careful. Malcolm's rules were strict: observe and report, never engage. We're not vigilantes, we're witnesses. Rowan listened to the radio chatter, trying to imagine Malcolm here, part of this network, speaking in code about life and death matters. There's a locked drawer in the cabinet, Rowan said. I only found keys for the top 2 drawers. Do you know what's in the bottom one? Kai shook her head. Malcolm kept some things compartmentalized. Need-to-know basis. He probably secured whatever he considered most sensitive. After Kai left, promising to check in again soon, Rowan returned to the journals. She read Malcolm's account of recruiting Kai, his observations about her dedication, his relief at having someone trustworthy on the Northern Watch. But she also found an entry that made her pause. November 2020, told Rowan I was on a fishing trip. Spent 5 days tracking an armed group through the backcountry. They were moving drugs, maybe weapons. Got close enough to photograph faces. Too close, one of them spotted movement. Had to hide in a ravine for 6 hours while they searched. Thought about Rowan the whole time, about what would happen if I didn't make it home. The lies are getting heavier, but someone has to do this. 6 hours hiding from armed traffickers. Malcolm had been 60 years old, heart already failing though he didn't know it yet, and he'd put himself in mortal danger rather than tell her the truth. Rowan felt anger surge again, hot and bright. What gave him the right to make those choices alone? What gave him the right to risk leaving her widowed for a mission she'd never agreed to? But underneath the anger was something else. Reluctant admiration. Malcolm had seen something wrong and decided to act. Most people would have looked away, told themselves it wasn't their problem. Malcolm had built a network, dedicated years of his life, taken real risks to fight something genuinely evil. The complexity of her feelings was exhausting. She tried calling Tenley, but got voicemail. Left a message, "Hi, honey. I'm still in Montana, at Dad's cabin. There's a lot to process here. Call when you can." Then she called Gail, who answered immediately. "Rowan, thank God, I've been worried. How is it up there?" "Complicated." Rowan looked around the cabin. Malcolm's life's work, secret and profound. Malcolm was involved in something important. I'm trying to understand it. What kind of something? I can't explain over the phone. But Gail, he wasn't having an affair. He was doing something that mattered, in a way I'm only starting to comprehend. Are you safe? Yes, isolated, but safe. There are people here who knew Malcolm, who've been helping me understand. They talked for another 10 minutes, Gail's practical concern a tether to her normal life. After hanging up, Rowan felt both grounded and unmoored. Her life in Oregon seemed distant, almost unreal. This cabin, these mountains, Malcolm's secret network, this felt immediate and present in a way nothing had since his death. As evening approached, Rowan studied the topographical maps on the wall. Malcolm had marked positions, routes, observation points. She found the cabin's location, then the other positions. Bucks to the east, Kais to the north, others scattered across the region. They formed a web of watching, a network of attention in places where attention was rare. The locked bottom drawer of the filing cabinet drew her eye. What had Malcolm kept in there? What was sensitive enough to lock away even from the rest of his documentation? She searched the cabin again, looking for the third key. Checked every conceivable hiding place. Nothing. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, she sat at Malcolm's desk and opened his most recent journal again. The last entry haunted her. "I hope you'll forgive me." "I don't know if I will," she whispered to the empty room. But she was still here, still reading, still trying to understand. That had to mean something. The snow came hard that night. Rowan woke to wind howling against the cabin walls and white obscuring the windows. She'd experienced Oregon rain, but this mountain storm was different, fierce and isolating. The world beyond the glass disappeared into swirling white. She spent the morning maintaining the fire, rationing food, trying to stay warm. The solar panels were covered with snow, so she conserved electricity. The cabin felt smaller, the silence more complete. This was Malcolm's reality. Weeks alone in winter, watching and waiting. With nothing else to do, she returned to the operational files. Malcolm had kept meticulous supply logs, documenting everything he brought to the cabin and when. Each trip was recorded with dates, duration, purpose. The pattern was clear. He'd been coming here 4 to 6 times a year, stays ranging from a week to nearly a month. She found financial records too. Malcolm had maintained a separate account for the network's needs: supplies, equipment, occasional payments to the delivery service that brought provisions. The amounts were modest but consistent. He'd been funding this operation from their savings, small amounts she'd never noticed missing, more lies by omission, more secrets hidden in plain sight. But as she read deeper, she found something that shifted her perspective. Malcolm had documented every dollar spent and every operation affected by the network's intelligence. He'd kept a running tally of what their work had accomplished. November 2018. Intelligence provided to DEA led to interdiction of 50 kilograms of methamphetamine. Estimated street value, $500,000. 3 arrests. Northern Corridor disrupted for 4 months. June 2020. Trafficking operation documented by network resulted in federal investigation. 12 victims recovered, 7 arrests, 3 state criminal organization dismantled. On and on, year after year. The network had made a real difference. People who would have vanished had been saved. Criminal operations had been disrupted. The wilderness had become less hospitable to predators. Malcolm had kept a separate page with a simple count. Lives directly impacted by network intelligence. 73. 73 people. Real individuals with names and stories, though Malcolm would never know them. People who existed because he and his network had paid attention where no one else did. Rowan stared at that number for a long time. 73 lives weighed against 15 years of lies. How did you calculate that moral equation? She found herself looking at the radio equipment again. Kai had shown her the basics, but Rowan hadn't tried using it. Now, with the storm isolating her completely, she felt the pull of connection. She powered up the system, following the steps Kai had demonstrated. Static filled the cabin, then voices emerged, brief, coded exchanges. She recognized Buck's gravelly tone, someone else she didn't know. Then Kai, northern position, checking in. Storm's bad up here. Visibility 0. No activity possible until it clears. Eastern position confirms. Maintaining shelter. Check in tomorrow at 800. Communications Central. All positions hold. Stay safe. Network maintains watch when weather permits. That must be Vincent, the communications coordinator Malcolm had written about. His voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who'd done this for years. Rowan keyed the microphone hesitantly. This is the cabin. Malcolm's cabin. Rowan Cade here. Silence. Then Vincent's voice, surprised. Mrs. Cade, you're still there. Storm caught you? Yes, I'm fine. Just listening. Good to know you're safe. That cabin's solid. Malcolm built it right. You'll weather this fine. Other voices chimed in, brief greetings, welcomes, assurances that if she needed anything, they'd help when the storm cleared. These strangers who'd known her husband's secret life were offering support without hesitation. After signing off, Rowan sat with the strange warmth of that connection. She wasn't entirely alone. The network Malcolm had built extended around her, invisible but present. She spent the afternoon reading more journals, these from the middle years of Malcolm's operation. The entries showed his evolution from lone observer to network coordinator. He'd learned from mistakes, refined procedures, built trust with his recruits, but she also found the coded entries she'd noticed before. Malcolm had written in plain language most of the time, but certain entries used a simple substitution cipher, one he'd taught her during their early marriage as a game, a private language just for them. She'd forgotten about it until now. But the code came back quickly, muscle memory of a younger self who'd written silly love notes in cipher for her husband to decode. The coded entries revealed what Malcolm hadn't wanted casual readers to see. Details about specific operations, names of law enforcement contacts, sensitive intelligence about criminal organizations, and personal thoughts he'd felt too vulnerable to write plainly. One entry from 5 years ago, decoded, I miss her. Every day I'm here I miss Rowan, the way she reads with tea in the morning, her laugh when something genuinely surprises her, the feel of her hand in mine. I'm building something important, but I'm losing her in the process. I can feel the distance growing. She thinks I'm pulling away because I don't love her anymore. The truth is, I love her so much, I'm trying to protect her from this dangerous world I've stepped into. But protection through ignorance is still betrayal. I know that. I just don't know how to stop. Rowan pressed her fingers against the page, tears blurring the words. Malcolm had known. He'd understood the cost of his choices, and he'd chosen the mission anyway. The storm continued through the night. Rowan lay in bed, listening to wind scream and snow hammer the roof. She thought about Malcolm alone here through storms like this, committed to his purpose, separated from everything familiar. She thought about the 73 lives. About Kai, who'd found purpose after burning out. About Buck, still watching in his 70s because someone needed to. About a network of people who'd decided that paying attention mattered. By morning the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed. Snow buried everything, 3 feet at least, maybe more. The cabin was an island in white. Rowan dug out the door, cleared the solar panels, marveled at the crystalline silence. The radio crackled with check-ins, all positions reporting safe. Network resuming normal watch schedules as conditions allowed. Rowan found herself thinking about the locked drawer again. She'd searched everywhere for the 3rd key, but maybe Malcolm hadn't hidden it somewhere obvious. Maybe it was in the code. She went through the journals again, looking for coded entries that might contain references to keys or locks. Found one from 6 months before Malcolm died. Decoded, sealed the final evidence in the secure drawer. E-location, where we first said I love you, coordinates of memory. Where they'd first said I love you. Rowan's breath caught. She knew exactly where that was. A camping trip to Crater Lake in 1987, their first summer together. Malcolm had said it first, standing at the rim overlook. She remembered the exact spot. She found the topographical map of Crater Lake in Malcolm's collection. Studied the rim, found the overlook. The coordinates were marked, 42.9446 degree N, 122 1090 degree W. Rowan stared at the numbers. That was the key, literally. The coordinates themselves. She grabbed a piece of paper and wrote them out, tried various combinations. Then she noticed the filing cabinet's combination lock on the bottom drawer. She'd assumed it was key-locked. But no, it had a numerical dial. She tried the coordinates as numbers, 429446, 1221-09, nothing. Reversed them, nothing. Then she tried the date of that trip, July 7th, 1987, 7-7-87. Still nothing. She sat back, frustrated. Where we first said I love you, coordinates of memory. The words echoed in her mind. Then it hit her. Not the geographical coordinates. The coordinates of the memory itself. The date they'd met, September 15th, 1986. 9:15:86. She tried it on the combination lock. Click. The drawer opened. Inside was a sealed envelope marked, "Urgent, open only if I'm gone," and a thick file folder. There was also a burner phone still charged and a USB drive. Rowan's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Malcolm's handwriting urgent and clear. "Rowan, if you've opened this, I'm gone, and you've found everything else first. I'm sorry for doing this to you, leaving you with a burden you never asked for. But there's something active, something immediate, that I couldn't finish before my time ran out. I need you to know about it because someone has to complete this work. And you're the only person I trust completely to make the right choice about what comes next. For the past 4 months, I've been tracking a new operation. Not the usual drug runners we see occasionally. Something worse. Human trafficking, sophisticated and organized. They move people through the Northern Corridor on a monthly cycle. I've documented their patterns, routes, vehicles, everything. But I need more evidence before federal authorities will prioritize this remote operation over their other cases. The next convoy should arrive around the 15th of the month. I'm writing this on the 3rd. If I'm gone before then, and you're reading this, that convoy is coming soon and someone needs to document it. The file contains everything I've gathered so far. Routes, timing, vehicle descriptions, photographic evidence. The USB has encrypted files with even more sensitive intelligence. The burner phone has one contact, Harwood. Colonel Daniel Harwood, retired Army intelligence. He was my commanding officer 30 years ago. He's been my contact for passing critical intelligence to federal agencies. He knows about the network, supports what we do, and has the connections to make authorities act when we provide solid evidence. I know what I'm asking is enormous. I know you have every right to walk away from this. But those people being trafficked, they're somebody's daughters, somebody's sons. They're terrified and helpless. And right now, you might be the only person who can help them. The network will support you if you choose to help. Buck, Kai, Vincent, they're trained, experienced, and trustworthy. You're not alone in this, but the choice has to be yours. I love you, Rowan. I've loved you every day since September 15th, 1986. I'm sorry I spent so much of our time together keeping secrets. I'm sorry I let the mission come between us. But I'm not sorry for the mission itself. It mattered. It saved lives. And this final operation, if someone completes it, will save more. You've always been braver than you believed. Trust yourself. Trust the network. And forgive me if you can, Malcolm. Rowan set the letter down carefully, afraid she might crumple it with shaking hands. Malcolm's final mission, an active trafficking operation. Evidence that needed gathering. A choice that would determine whether vulnerable people were saved or lost. She opened the file folder. Photographs spilled out. Long-range shots of trucks, of men transferring cargo, of shadowy figures in wilderness darkness. Malcolm had been building a case, piece by piece, but the documentation was incomplete. Notes in his handwriting indicated gaps. Need closer photos of staging area. Need confirmation of timing. Need vehicle plate numbers. The USB drive would require Malcolm's laptop, which sat on the desk. Rowan plugged it in, waited for it to boot. Password protected, of course. She tried their anniversary date, wrong. Tried Tenley's birthday, wrong. Tried that Crater Lake date, 9/15/86. The laptop unlocked. The USB contained folders of documents, surveillance logs, photographs organized by date, audio recordings of intercepted radio chatter, detailed maps with routes marked. Malcolm had been thorough. But he was right, it wasn't enough yet. Authorities would need more definitive proof to commit resources to such a remote operation. Rowan looked at the burner phone. One contact, Harwood. She stared at it for a long time before pressing the call button. It rang 3 times. Then a man's voice, measured and calm. "This is Harwood. Colonel Harwood? My name is Rowan Cade." Malcolm's wife, a pause. "Mrs. Cade, I've been expecting your call. I'm very sorry for your loss. Malcolm was one of the finest men I've known. You knew about everything. The cabin, the network, the operation. I did. Malcolm and I stayed in contact after our service ended. When he told me what he was building in Montana, I supported it. The work he did mattered, Mrs. Cade. It saved lives. He left me information about an active trafficking operation. I know. We discussed it before he died. He was worried he wouldn't live to document it fully. He hoped," Harwood paused, "he hoped you might be willing to complete what he started. That's insane. I'm 62 years old. I have no training for this. I don't know anything about surveillance or intelligence gathering. Malcolm believed you were capable. He trusted you more than anyone. Malcolm also lied to me for 15 years. Yes," Harwood acknowledged. "He did. That was wrong. But his faith in your capabilities wasn't misplaced. The network will support you. You won't be working alone." Rowan stood at the window, looking at snow-covered wilderness. "What happens if I don't? If I just go home and let someone else handle this?" "There is no one else, Mrs. Cade. The operation is too remote, too low profile for federal resources without compelling evidence. Local authorities are overwhelmed and understaffed. Malcolm spent 4 months building this case because he knew it was the only way to stop what's happening. If you walk away, the next convoy moves through on schedule. Those people disappear, and it continues month after month because no one else is watching. 73 lives, Rowan thought. How many more could be saved? "I need to think about this," she said. "Of course. But Mrs. Cade, according to Malcolm's timeline, the next convoy is due in 4 days. If you decide to help, we'll need to move quickly. After the call ended, Rowan sat in silence. 4 days, an impossible choice. Safety or purpose? Her comfortable life or Malcolm's dangerous mission? Walking away or stepping forward? She thought about Tenley, about Gale, about all the reasons to leave. She thought about the 73 people who'd been saved. Because Malcolm and his network paid attention, she thought about Malcolm's last words to her. You've always been braver than you believed. Outside, the wilderness stretched endlessly, beautiful, dangerous, and full of secrets. Just like the man she'd married, Rowan spent the rest of the day studying Malcolm's files on the trafficking operation. The level of detail was staggering. He'd documented 3 previous convoys over the past 4 months, identifying patterns with precision. The operation ran like clockwork. A truck convoy would arrive at an abandoned mining camp 40 miles northeast of the cabin. People were transferred from enclosed trucks to smaller, less conspicuous vehicles. The transfer took about 6 hours, always starting after dark. Then the smaller vehicles dispersed on different routes through wilderness roads, avoiding highway checkpoints. Malcolm had photographed the staging area from a distance, but the images weren't clear enough to identify individuals or read license plates. He'd noted this repeatedly. Need closer observation point. Need better documentation. He'd been planning to establish that position when he died. Rowan found herself studying the topographical maps, tracing the route to the staging area. 2 days hard hiking in good conditions. Probably 3 in snow. Malcolm had marked observation points, safe approaches, emergency exits. He'd planned this mission as carefully as any military operation. She picked up the burner phone again, scrolled to Harwood's number, but didn't call. Instead, she sat with the weight of the decision. That evening, Buck arrived with more supplies. He stomped snow off his boots and assessed her with sharp eyes. You found the bottom drawer, he said. Not a question. How did you know? You've got that look. Like you've seen something heavy and you're trying to figure out if you can carry it. He set down a box of supplies. Malcolm told me about the active operation before he died. Said if anything happened to him, you'd find the information and have to choose. He shouldn't have put this on me. No, Buck agreed. But he did. And here we are. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Buck said, I can tell you what we'd need if someone decided to complete Malcolm's documentation. Not saying you should. Just if you were considering it. Rowan nodded slowly. The staging area is 42 miles northeast. Malcolm identified an observation point on a ridge overlooking the site. Natural rock formation, good cover, clear sight lines. 2-day hike to reach it in current conditions. Person would need to arrive at least 12 hours before the convoy to set up properly. That's cutting it close. If the convoy comes in 4 days, we'd need to leave tomorrow morning. Get to the observation point, establish the hide, wait for the operation to begin. Buck leaned forward. I'd go myself, but my knees are shot. Can't make that hike anymore. I could do it, but her sector's showing unusual activity she needs to monitor. Vincent's needed for communications coordination. You're saying I'm the only option. I'm saying if this mission happens, you'd be the primary observer. But you wouldn't be alone. Kai and I would accompany you partway, establish a support position a mile back. Vincent would maintain radio contact. We'd be close enough to help if anything went wrong, and if something does go wrong. These are dangerous people. They are. But Malcolm's plan accounts for that. The observation point is remote, well concealed. The traffickers won't know anyone's watching. We document and withdraw, that's the mission. Same rules Malcolm always followed. Observe and report, never engage. After Buck left, Rowan tried calling Tenley again. This time her daughter answered, sounding distracted. Mom? Are you still in Montana? Yes, Tenley, I need to tell you something about your father. She tried to explain, carefully, vaguely, about Malcolm's work. The network, the surveillance, the purpose behind his absences. Tenley listened in silence. Dad was some kind of vigilante. Her voice was tight. Not a vigilante, a witness. He documented criminal activity in remote areas where authorities couldn't maintain presence. He built a network of people doing the same thing. They provided intelligence that led to arrests, to operations being shut down, to people being saved. And he never told you, never told us. No. He kept it secret because Rowan struggled for words, because he thought it was necessary, because he thought we'd worry or try to stop him. He was right. This is crazy, Mom. And you should come home. Now. I will. Soon. I need to understand this first. Understand what? That Dad lied to us for years while playing secret agent in the woods? There's nothing to understand. He chose that over us. The line went quiet. Then Tenley said more gently, I'm sorry. I know you're grieving, but please come home. Don't let Dad's secrets pull you into something dangerous. After hanging up, Rowan called Gail. You sound tired, Gail said immediately. I am. It's more complicated than I thought. Tell me. Rowan explained, editing details but conveying the essentials. Malcolm's network, the trafficking operation, the choice she faced. Gail listened without interrupting. What do you want to do? Gail asked finally. I don't know. Part of me wants to come home. Pretend I never found any of this. But part of me, Rowan stopped. Part of you wants to finish what Malcolm started. Is that crazy? Maybe. But maybe it's also brave. And maybe it's the thing that finally helps you understand who he was. Gail paused. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you're not doing this out of guilt or grief. I don't know what I'm doing it out of, or if I'm doing it at all. That night, Rowan pulled out Malcolm's military discharge papers, documents she'd seen once or twice over the years, but never examined closely. His service record showed Army intelligence, various postings, honorable discharge in 1987, commendations for analytical work, strategic thinking, mission success. She found more in the files, letters between Malcolm and Harwood spanning decades. The colonel had encouraged Malcolm's network from the beginning. You have the terrain knowledge, the skills, and the dedication. The work you're proposing is vital. Authorities can't be everywhere, but concerned citizens can. Just maintain strict protocols. Document, don't engage. Be the eyes and ears. Another letter from 10 years ago. The intelligence you provided on the northern corridor led to significant arrests. Your network is making a real difference. I know the personal cost is high, the secrecy, the time away from family. But what you're building matters. And one from 2 years ago. Malcolm, your last medical report concerns me. I know you're determined to continue the work, but you must consider your limits. This mission cannot cost you your life. But it had, in a way. Malcolm's heart had failed while carrying the weight of his secret work. He died, knowing he'd left unfinished business. Rowan stood and walked to the window. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the mountain darkness. She thought about Malcolm. Standing here, looking at the same stars, feeling the weight of his choices. She thought about 73 lives saved, about the convoy coming in 3 days, about people who would disappear if no one documented what was happening. She thought about Tenley's anger, Gail's worry, her own fear, and she thought about Malcolm's. Words, you've always been braver than you believed. By dawn, she'd made her decision. She picked up the burner phone and called Harwood. Colonel, this is Rowan Cade. I'll do it. I'll complete Malcolm's mission. A pause. Then, are you certain? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Tell me what I need to know. Harwood spent 20 minutes briefing her. The network would provide support. Buck and Kai would accompany her to the staging area, help establish the observation position. Vincent would coordinate communications. The goal was simple. Document the trafficking operation with clear photographs and video. Confirm Malcolm's intelligence. Provide evidence compelling enough to force federal intervention. This is reconnaissance only, Harwood emphasized. If the situation becomes dangerous, you withdraw immediately. Getting evidence is important, but your safety is paramount. Understood. Understood. Malcolm trusted you with this for a reason, Mrs. Cade. Trust yourself. After the call, Rowan began preparing methodically. Malcolm had left detailed checklists for this type of operation. She gathered equipment, camera, with telephoto lens, backup batteries, memory cards, winter gear, food, water, emergency supplies. She found tactical clothing in Malcolm's gear, dark, non-reflective, designed for concealment. It fit reasonably well. She felt strange putting it on, like wearing someone else's skin. The radio crackled. Buck's voice, "Cabin, this is Eastern Position. Weather report shows clear conditions for next 72 hours. Window is open." Rowan keyed the microphone. "Eastern Position, this is Cabin. I'm going. Confirmed." A pause. Then, "Copy that. Kai and I will be there at 0600 tomorrow. Get some rest." "It's a hard hike." Vincent came on next. "Cabin, this is Communications. Proud to have you on the team. Malcolm would be too." Other voices chimed in, network members she hadn't met, offering support and encouragement. These strangers who'd known Malcolm's secret life were welcoming her into it. Rowan spent the evening reviewing Malcolm's notes on the observation point, memorizing routes and procedures. She found a journal entry from 3 months ago where he'd scouted the location. Perfect position. Ridge provides elevation and concealment. Natural rock formation offers cover from below. Clear sight lines to staging area, approximately 800 yards. Can document entire operation from here without being seen. This is where we'll get the evidence we need. He'd drawn sketches, marked approaches, noted wind patterns and light conditions. He'd been preparing for this mission when death interrupted. Now Rowan would finish it. She barely slept. Her mind raced through scenarios, worries, second-guessing. But when dawn came, she rose and dressed in Malcolm's tactical gear, feeling the weight of his mission settling onto her shoulders. Buck and Kai arrived precisely at 6. They checked her equipment with professional efficiency, made minor adjustments, approved her preparations. "You ready for this?" Kai asked. "No," Rowan said honestly. "But we're doing it anyway." They loaded their packs and set out into the frozen wilderness. 3 people bound by purpose and the memory of a man who'd believed watching mattered more than comfort. The first day's hike was brutal. Rowan had thought she was reasonably fit. She walked regularly, worked on her feet at the library, but mountain hiking with a full pack was entirely different. Her legs burned, her shoulders ached, her lungs struggled with the altitude and cold. Buck and Kai moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting their pace to accommodate her, but never stopping completely. They hiked in relative silence, saving breath for the trail. By afternoon, Rowan's entire body screamed for rest. But she pushed forward, driven by stubborn determination and the knowledge that turning back meant abandoning the mission. They reached a midpoint shelter as darkness fell, a small survival cache Malcolm had established years ago. Buck got a fire going while Kai prepared simple food. They ate in companionable quiet, too tired for much conversation. "How you holding up?" Buck asked eventually. "Surviving," Rowan managed. "You're doing better than most would. This terrain's unforgiving." Around the fire that night, Kai shared her story. "I worked Child Protective Services for 15 years. Saw kids disappear into the system. Saw families torn apart. Saw people who fell through every crack society has. I burned out hard. Moved to Montana thinking I'd find peace in the wilderness. And you found Malcolm instead," Rowan said. "He found me. I was hiking one day and saw something strange. Men moving through the backcountry with way too much gear looking wrong. Mentioned it at a local diner. Malcolm overheard, approached me later, asked what I'd seen, then showed me what he'd been documenting." Kai stared into the fire. "At first I thought he was paranoid. Then he took me to an observation point. Let me watch. I saw a convoy moving people through wilderness. In the middle of the night, saw scared faces, armed guards, the whole operation. Malcolm said, 'Nobody else is watching. Somebody has to.' And I couldn't argue with that. Do you ever regret joining the network? Sometimes. When it's cold and dangerous, and I'm alone in the woods watching criminals. But then I think about the operations we've helped shut down, the people who got rescued because we provided intelligence. That makes it worthwhile." Buck shared his story too. Former Army Ranger, retired after injuries ended his service. Moved to Montana for solitude, found purpose with Malcolm instead. First time I met Malcolm, I knew he was military. You can always tell. We talked tactics, observation, patrol patterns. He was sharp, sharper than most officers I'd served under. He told me what he was building, asked if I'd be interested. I'd been feeling useless in retirement. The network gave me a mission again. They talked about Malcolm, his quiet leadership, his strategic mind, his absolute commitment to the work. He talked about you all the time, Buck said to Rowan. Showed us pictures, told stories. He felt guilty every day about the secrets. But he also felt called to the mission, Rowan finished. I know. I've read the journals. He said something once, Kai added. Said he hoped someday you'd understand. Said if anything happened to him, you'd either forgive him completely or hate him completely, and he'd accept either one. But he hoped for forgiveness. Rowan stared into the flames. I'm somewhere in between. I understand why he did it. I admire the work, but I also feel betrayed by the lies. I don't know how to reconcile those feelings. Maybe you don't have to, Buck said. Maybe complicated is okay. People are complicated. Love is complicated. Malcolm was doing something important, but he was also lying to someone he loved. Both things can be true. They slept in the shelter, exhausted and aching. Rowan dreamed of Malcolm, not as she'd known him, but as he must have been here, hiking these trails, watching from observation points dedicated to his secret purpose. The second day was harder. The terrain grew steeper, the temperature dropped, and Rowan's body protested every step. But she pushed through, drawing on reserves of determination she'd forgotten she had. By afternoon, they approached the observation point. Buck called a halt a mile back, where terrain provided concealment for a support position. This is as far as Kai and I go, he explained. From here you continue alone to the observation point. We'll maintain radio contact. If anything goes wrong, we're close enough to help. Kai helped Rowan prepare. Remember Malcolm's protocols. Move slowly, avoid sudden movements, maintain concealment. Set up your position carefully. You'll be there for hours. Document everything, but if you feel unsafe, withdraw immediately. They reviewed radio procedures, emergency signals, extraction plans. Then Kai handed Rowan a small device. GPS beacon. If you press this button, we come immediately, no questions asked. Use it if you need us. Rowan adjusted her pack and continued alone. The forest grew denser, the silence more complete. She moved carefully, following Malcolm's marked route. Every sound seemed amplified. Her breathing, her footsteps crunching snow, branches creaking in wind. The observation point appeared gradually, a natural rock formation overlooking a valley. Below, perhaps 800 yards distant, sat the abandoned mining camp Malcolm had identified as the staging area. Rowan established her hide carefully, following Malcolm's notes. She set up the camera, prepared backup equipment, arranged everything for quick access. Then she settled in to wait. The waiting was hardest. Hours passed slowly, cold seeping through layers of clothing despite her preparations. Rowan's mind wandered to dark places. What if the convoy didn't come? What if they'd changed their schedule? What if Malcolm's intelligence was wrong? Or worse, what if they came and saw her, discovered the observation point, came up here? She pushed the fears away, focused on Malcolm's training. Stay calm, stay hidden, trust the preparation. As darkness fell, Rowan activated the radio. Support position, this is observation point. In position, no activity yet. Buck's voice crackled back. Copy that. Maintain watch. We're here if you need us. Vincent came on from the communications hub at his location. Observation point, communications. You're doing great. Malcolm would be proud. Would he? Rowan wondered. Or would he regret putting this burden on her? She found the voice recorder in her pack, the one with Malcolm's messages. Plugged in earbuds and listened to his voice in the darkness. Rowan, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and you've found this place. I'm sorry. She'd listened to these recordings before, back at the cabin. But hearing them now, alone on this ridge, carrying his mission forward, they hit differently. Malcolm talked about his failing heart, about knowing his time was limited. The doctor said 3 to 5 years. I didn't tell you because you'd have made me stop everything. Stop the network, stop the missions, spend my remaining time resting. And maybe that would have been wiser. Maybe I'd have lived longer. But I couldn't stop. Not when I knew what was happening out here. He talked about the trafficking operation he'd been tracking. This is bigger than anything we've seen before. More organized, more sophisticated. If we can document it fully, if we can provide enough evidence, federal authorities will have to act. They'll shut down this corridor. They'll save people. His voice grew emotional. I know I'm asking too much of you. I know leaving you with this mission is selfish. But Rowan, you're the only person I trust completely. You're stronger than you know, braver than you believe. If you decide to help, you'll have the network behind you. And if you decide to walk away, I understand that too. I love you. Whatever you choose, I love you. Rowan wiped tears from her face, grateful for the darkness. Malcolm's voice continued, sharing memories of their life together, expressing regret for time lost to secrets, hoping she'd forgive him eventually. The final recording was brief. Thank you for everything. For 37 years. For loving me even when I made it hard. For being the best part of my life. I'm sorry I couldn't be fully honest. I'm sorry I chose the mission over transparency. But I'm not sorry for loving you or for trying to do something that mattered. Be brave, Rowan. Finish this if you can. And then live, really live the rest of your life. That's what I want for you. The recording ended. Rowan sat in silence, holding the device, feeling Malcolm's presence despite his absence. Movement below caught her attention. Lights in the valley, vehicles approaching the staging area. Her pulse accelerated. This was it. The convoy was arriving. She grabbed the camera, adjusted settings for low light conditions, and began documenting. 2 trucks pulled into the abandoned mining camp, followed by a van. Men emerged, at least 6 that Rowan could count. They moved with purpose, setting up equipment, preparing for the operation. Rowan photographed everything, hands steady despite her racing heart. Vehicle plates, faces, equipment. Malcolm had been right. This was organized and professional. An hour later, more vehicles arrived. The enclosed truck doors opened, and people emerged. Even at this distance, even in darkness, Rowan could see their fear. Young women, some barely adults. A few young men, maybe 15 people total, huddled and controlled. She documented it all, feeling sick but maintaining focus. This was why Malcolm had dedicated years to this work. These were the people who mattered, the vulnerable ones who needed someone to pay attention. The operation continued for hours, people being processed, transferred to smaller vehicles, dispersed in different directions. Rowan captured everything, building the case Malcolm had started, but then one of the men below stopped, turned, seemed to scan the ridge where she was hidden. He pointed. 2 other men looked up. Rowan's breath froze. Had they spotted something? Sun glare on the lens, movement, her breath condensing in cold air. The radio crackled in her ear. Buck's voice urgent but controlled. Observation point, we're seeing activity. 2 men heading up the ridge toward your position. You'd need to move. Now, Rowan's training was non-existent, but Malcolm's notes had included this scenario. She packed the camera carefully, evidence secured, grabbed essential gear, and began moving along the escape route Malcolm had marked. Behind her, she heard voices. The men were climbing, moving faster than she could with her pack and aching body. Support position, I'm on the move. They're close, copy that. Continue on escape route. We're moving to intercept. Stay calm, stay calm. Rowan almost laughed. 2 armed men were pursuing her through mountain darkness, and she was supposed to stay calm. But she kept moving, following Malcolm's path, trusting his planning. The route led through difficult terrain, over rocks, through dense growth across a narrow ravine. Terrain that would slow younger, faster pursuers as much as it slowed her. She heard the men behind her shouting to each other. They were closing the distance. Rowan reached the ravine crossing Malcolm had marked, a fallen log spanning a 10-foot gap. In daylight, with time to consider, she'd never cross it. But now, with no choice, she stepped onto the log and hurried across, arms out for balance. Behind her, one of the pursuers attempted the crossing. She heard a shout, a crash. He'd slipped. His partner stopped to help him. Rowan kept moving, gaining precious distance. Her lungs burned, legs shook, but determination drove her forward. She emerged onto a ridge and saw lights below, Buck and Kai, positioned and waiting. The pursuers crested behind her, saw the setup, froze, standoff, tense moment where violence seemed inevitable, then the sound of helicopters, distant but growing closer. Federal response arriving at the valley. The operation was being shut down in real time. The pursuers heard it too. They looked at each other, then back at the valley where their operation was being dismantled. They turned and retreated, running back toward the staging area. Rowan collapsed into the snow, gasping. Kai reached her first, helped her up. "You did it." Malcolm's evidence, plus what you documented tonight. They can't escape this. Below in the valley, law enforcement was moving in. The trafficking operation was being dismantled. Rowan watched through Buck's binoculars. Vehicles surrounded, people freed, arrests made. Outstanding work, Harwood's voice came through on the radio. Federal response confirms major trafficking operation interdicted. Multiple arrests, victims recovered. Malcolm's final mission is complete. Rowan sat on the ridge, shaking from adrenaline and cold and relief. She'd done it, completed Malcolm's work, documented evidence that would save lives. Buck offered quiet respect. "You're one of us now if you want to be." Rowan looked at him, at Kai, at the network that had supported her. Then down at the valley, where people were being freed because someone had paid attention. Malcolm's legacy continued through her. 73 lives had become more. The number would keep growing as long as someone kept watching. The hike back to the cabin took 3 days. Rowan's body had been pushed beyond its limits, and even with Buck and Kai's support, every step was agony. But she'd completed the mission. The evidence was secured, the trafficking operation shut down, and people were safe. They reached the cabin on a cold afternoon. Rowan had never been so grateful to see the log structure. Inside, she collapsed onto Malcolm's bed and slept for 16 hours straight. When she finally woke, Buck was there with food and news. Harwood called. Federal authorities confirmed everything. 12 victims recovered, 7 arrests so far, with more expected. They're tracking the organization across 3 states. Your documentation made all the difference. Rowan sat up slowly, accepting the coffee Buck offered. So it's over. This operation is... But the work continues. The network maintains watch. Other corridors, other threats. Buck studied her. Question is, what do you want to do now? It was the question Rowan had been avoiding. She could return to Oregon, to her library job and coastal apartment, resume her normal life, having satisfied Malcolm's final request. Or she could stay, become part of the network he'd built, continue the work that had consumed his final years. "I need time to think," she said. Over the next few days, Rowan tried to process everything. She called Tenley, who was relieved to hear she was safe but still angry about the risks she'd taken. "Mom, you could have been killed. Dad's mission isn't your responsibility." "I know, but I chose to help anyway." "Why?" "Because people needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. Because Malcolm believed I could do this. Because..." Rowan paused. "Because it mattered." The conversation ended awkwardly, their relationship still fractured. But Tenley agreed to visit in spring, to see the cabin and understand what her father had built. That was something. Gail was more supportive. "You sound different, stronger. I feel different. Like I've discovered parts of myself I didn't know existed. Are you coming home?" "Eventually. I just need to figure some things out first." Rowan spent her days reading through the rest of Malcolm's journals, understanding the full scope of his work. She met more network members. Vincent finally came by in person, a thoughtful man in his 70s who'd been coordinating communications for a decade. Others stopped by with supplies and support. She began to see the network not as her late husband's secret obsession, but as a community of people who'd found purpose in paying attention. They weren't vigilantes or heroes, just ordinary people doing what they could in places where no one else was looking. 2 weeks after the mission, Rowan was organizing Malcolm's files when she found something she'd missed before. A sealed envelope tucked in the back of one of the filing drawers, marked with a recent date, just 3 months before Malcolm died. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter in Malcolm's handwriting and a smaller envelope addressed to Colonel Harwood, to be opened only if absolutely necessary. Rowan read Malcolm's letter first. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Either I'm dead, or I've been compromised, or the situation has escalated beyond what I can handle alone. The sealed envelope contains information I've kept compartmentalized from the rest of the network, information that could put people at risk if it fell into the wrong hands. What I'm about to tell you, I've told no one else. Not Buck, not Kai, not even Harwood, until he opens that sealed envelope. I kept it secret because the truth is dangerous, and involving others would make them targets. The trafficking operation I've been documenting isn't new. It's been running for at least 8 years, maybe longer. I discovered its existence by accident in 2017, but I've only recently understood its true scope. The operation isn't just some criminal organization moving people through wilderness. It's connected to something much larger, a network that spans multiple states and has protection at various levels. Local law enforcement can't touch it because some local officials are compromised. State agencies can't coordinate effectively because the operation moves across jurisdictions. Federal authorities are overwhelmed and underfunded. But here's what I discovered 3 months ago. What I've been investigating in secret. One of the coordinators of this trafficking network is someone with deep ties to this region. Someone who's been facilitating operations for years by providing cover, misdirection, and early warnings about law enforcement activity. I have evidence, but it's not complete yet. I need one more piece, definitive proof connecting this person to the trafficking organization. The next convoy will provide that proof. I've set up surveillance on a meeting that's supposed to happen at the staging area, where the local coordinator will make contact with the traffickers. If I can document that meeting, we can bring down not just the immediate operation, but the local infrastructure supporting it. We can clean out the corruption allowing this to continue. But if I'm gone before I can gather that evidence, someone needs to finish this. Someone needs to document that meeting and pass the evidence to Harwood, who has federal contacts high enough to act on this information without it getting buried. The problem is timing. The meeting happens during the same operation you've just documented, the one I've prepared you for. But I didn't tell you about the meeting because I wanted to protect you from the most dangerous part of the investigation. I'm sorry, Rowan. I'm asking too much again. But this is bigger than I realized. If we don't stop this now, it continues indefinitely. More people disappear, more lives destroyed. All because someone local is protecting the operation. The sealed envelope contains the name of the person I suspect, my evidence so far, and details about the meeting. If you choose to act on this information, Harwood will guide you. But you need to understand the risks. This person has resources, connections, and a strong motivation to prevent exposure. Whatever you decide, I love you. And I'm sorry for leaving you with this burden. Malcolm, Rowan's hands shook as she set down the letter. Malcolm had discovered corruption, protecting the trafficking operation. Someone local was involved, providing cover for criminals, allowing vulnerable people to be trafficked through these mountains. She looked at the sealed envelope addressed to Harwood. It sat there, innocent and dangerous, containing information Malcolm had died before he could act on. She should call Harwood immediately. Hand this over to someone with experience and resources. Let federal authorities handle it. But she'd read Malcolm's words. The next convoy will provide that proof. The convoy she'd just documented. The operation that was currently being investigated. If Malcolm was right about timing, the meeting he'd referenced had happened during the operation she'd observed. She'd photographed the entire event. The evidence might already be in her camera. Rowan pulled out the memory cards from the operation, loaded them onto Malcolm's laptop. Hundreds of images, the staging area, the vehicles, the people being trafficked, the men running the operation. She went through them methodically, looking for anything unusual. Most matched what she'd expected. Traffickers coordinating the convoy, victims being transferred, the organized brutality of the operation. Then she found it. A series of shots taken early in the operation before the main convoy arrived. A vehicle she hadn't noticed at the time, a local sheriff's SUV parked at the edge of the staging area, a man in uniform meeting with two men who were clearly part of the trafficking operation. The conversation looked businesslike, cooperative. Rowan zoomed in on the images. The sheriff's face was clear, his badge visible. She recognized him from town. She'd driven through the county seat several times, seen his picture on official notices. Sheriff Marcus Dalton, elected official, respected community figure, and according to these photographs, directly involved with the trafficking operation. Her stomach turned. Malcolm had been right. Local corruption was protecting the criminals, allowing them to operate with impunity. And now Rowan had evidence. Photographic proof of the sheriff meeting with traffickers. She called Harwood immediately. "Colonel, this is Rowan. I found something." Malcolm left information about local corruption connected to the trafficking operation. "I've photographs of a sheriff meeting with the traffickers." Silence on the line. Then, "Sheriff Dalton, you knew." Malcolm shared his suspicions a few months ago, but he didn't have proof. Just patterns, too many operations that happened to avoid law enforcement, too much advance warning for the traffickers. He suspected someone local was providing intelligence. Harwood paused. "If you have photographic evidence, that changes everything. What do we do?" "First, secure those images. Make copies, store them separately. If Dalton discovers you have evidence, you could be at risk. He doesn't know I exist. I'm just Malcolm's widow, here to settle the cabin, for now. But if he learns Malcolm was investigating him, he might come looking for evidence Malcolm gathered. The cabin could be a target." Rowan looked around the space. Malcolm's files, his journals, his life's work. All of it potentially at risk. "I'll open the envelope Malcolm left for you," Rowan said. "See what else he documented. Be careful, Mrs. Cade. Cornered corruption is dangerous. Dalton has resources and motivation to protect himself." After the call, Rowan opened the sealed envelope with careful hands. Inside was Malcolm's detailed evidence file on Sheriff Dalton. Malcolm had documented years of suspicious patterns, operations that mysteriously avoided law enforcement, tips that never resulted in arrests, convoys that changed routes just before planned interdictions. The evidence was circumstantial but damning, too many coincidences to be accidental. Malcolm had also documented Dalton's finances. The sheriff lived well beyond his official salary. Expensive truck, renovated home, investments that didn't match his income. Classic signs of corruption, but without direct proof, it was all speculation. Until now. Until the photographs Rowan had accidentally captured. She made copies of everything, the photos, Malcolm's evidence file, her own documentation, stored them on multiple USB drives, secured them in different locations around the cabin and on her person. Then she called Buck. "We have a problem." Malcolm discovered that Sheriff Dalton is connected to the trafficking operation. "I have photographs proving it." Buck was silent for a long moment. "Dalton, that explains a lot. Operations that went wrong, intelligence that got leaked. We thought we had a mole but couldn't identify them. Harwood's concerned Dalton might come after Malcolm's evidence if he realizes it exists. He's right to be concerned. Dalton has deputies, resources. If he decides the cabin is a threat, he could move against you." Buck's voice turned hard. "We need to secure you and the evidence. I'm coming over, Kai too. We'll set up a watch until Harwood can coordinate federal response." Rowan spent the evening securing the cabin while waiting for Buck and Kai to arrive. She hid the USB drives, organized the most critical files for quick evacuation if necessary, prepared an emergency pack. She felt the weight of Malcolm's final secret settling onto her shoulders. He'd discovered corruption, tracked it meticulously, prepared to expose it. But death had interrupted his investigation. Now that mission fell to her, too. She looked at his photograph on the desk. Malcolm, smiling, younger, before illness and secrets had aged him. "What else are you going to drop on me?" she whispered. But she knew the answer. Malcolm had dedicated his final years to this work. Every secret she uncovered, every mission she inherited was part of his legacy. He'd built something important, and now she was the keeper of that flame. Buck and Kai arrived after dark. They swept the area, checked approaches, set up a security rotation. Network members were on alert. If Dalton made a move, they'd know. How long until federal authorities can act? Kai asked. Harwood said days, maybe a week. They need to build a case, coordinate with agencies that aren't compromised by Dalton's influence. It's complicated. Then we hold here. Keep you safe. Keep the evidence secure. Standard defensive operation. Buck checked his rifle, face grim. Malcolm would want us protecting you. That night, Rowan lay awake listening to Buck and Kai maintaining watch outside. She thought about the path that had led here, Malcolm's death, the cabin discovery, the journals and secrets, the trafficking operation, and now this. She'd come to Montana 3 weeks ago, looking for answers about her husband's secret life. She'd found those answers, but also a mission she couldn't walk away from. Malcolm had built something too important to abandon. And now, with evidence of corruption threatening everything, walking away would mean letting criminals continue operating with impunity. She'd thought completing the trafficking documentation would be the end. But it was just another beginning. Malcolm's work kept expanding, pulling her deeper into a world she'd never imagined joining. Tomorrow, Harwood would start coordinating federal response. Evidence would be reviewed, cases built, authorities mobilized. Eventually, Sheriff Dalton would face justice for protecting traffickers. But tonight, Rowan lay in Malcolm's cabin, surrounded by his network, holding evidence that could bring down corruption. She'd become something she'd never expected, a keeper of dangerous secrets, a guardian of her husband's legacy, a woman who discovered she was braver than she'd believed. Outside, the wilderness stretched into darkness, and somewhere out there, a corrupt sheriff had no idea that his protection of evil had finally been documented. His crimes captured by a 62-year-old woman who just wanted to understand why her husband had lied. Morning brought fresh snow and a call from Harwood. Federal authorities are moving fast. Your evidence on Dalton is compelling. Combined with Malcolm's documentation and the trafficking operation arrests, they're building a comprehensive case. But it takes time to coordinate properly. How much time? Rowan asked. 72 hours minimum. They need to secure warrants, coordinate with uncorrupted local agencies, plan the operation to minimize flight risk. Dalton can't know we're coming. 3 days. Rowan looked at Buck and Kai, who'd maintained watch all night. Can the network hold for 3 days? We can hold indefinitely if necessary, Buck said after Harwood explained the situation. But we need to assume Dalton might discover something's wrong. The trafficking operation got shut down hard. Arrests, victims recovered, federal involvement. If Dalton's smart, he's already worried about exposure. Kai agreed. He'll be trying to figure out what went wrong. Whether someone documented the operation. Whether his involvement was captured. So we stay alert, Buck concluded. Maintain security. Keep Mrs. Cade safe until federal authorities can move. Harwood spent 20 minutes briefing them on what would happen. Federal agents would coordinate with state authorities to arrest Dalton simultaneously with raids on other trafficking organization members. The operation needed to be synchronized. If Dalton was arrested first, he might warn others. If others were arrested first, Dalton might flee. Your safety is priority, Harwood told Rowan. If at any point you feel threatened, the network extracts you immediately. The evidence is secured. We have copies. You don't need to be there when this goes down, but Rowan found herself wanting to be there, to see Malcolm's final investigation reach conclusion, to witness the corrupt official who'd enabled so much suffering face justice. I'm staying, she said, until it's done. After the call, the network went into what Buck called defensive posture. Additional members arrived at the cabin. Vincent set up an enhanced communications hub. 2 others Rowan hadn't met established observation posts on the approaches. Overkill, maybe, Buck admitted. But Malcolm would never forgive us if something happened to you now. Rowan spent the first day reviewing all of Malcolm's evidence with Vincent, making sure they had complete documentation. The thoroughness of Malcolm's work was staggering. Years of observations, patterns identified, connections traced. He'd built an irrefutable case against Dalton, lacking only the photographic proof Rowan had accidentally provided. He was meticulous, Vincent said, going through files. Everything documented, every source verified. Malcolm understood that accusations of corruption need to be bulletproof, or they backfire. Did you know he was investigating Dalton? Not specifically. Malcolm compartmentalized sensitive information. We knew someone local was probably compromised. Too many operations going wrong. But Malcolm kept the actual investigation to himself until he had proof. That evening, network members gathered at the cabin, the first time Rowan had met them all together. 12 people, ranging from their 50s to mid-70s. Former military, retired law enforcement, social workers, wilderness guides, locals who cared about their land. Malcolm had recruited carefully, building a team of capable, dedicated individuals. They shared stories about Malcolm, and Rowan began to see her husband through their eyes. Not the distant, secretive man of her final years with him, but a leader who inspired loyalty, a strategist who planned carefully, a mentor who taught patiently. Malcolm saved my life once, said a woman named Teresa, early 60s, former forest ranger. I was observing a drug operation that went wrong. They spotted me, came after me. I radioed for help. Malcolm was 20 miles away, but he coordinated the entire network. Created a diversion, established an extraction route, got me out safely. Never even raised his voice on the radio, just calm, clear instructions that saved my life. Others shared similar stories. Times Malcolm had helped them, protected them, guided them through dangerous situations. The network wasn't just an organization, it was a community bound by trust and shared purpose. He talked about you, Teresa said to Rowan, about how much he loved you, how guilty he felt about the secrets. He said you deserved better than what he was giving you, but he couldn't stop the work. It ate at him. Did he ever consider telling me? Rowan asked. All the time, Buck said. But he was afraid. Afraid you'd make him stop. Afraid you'd be at risk if you knew too much. Afraid the knowledge would hurt you. So he carried it alone. The second day brought tension. Harwood reported that federal authorities had confirmed warrants and were coordinating final details. The operation would happen tomorrow, simultaneous arrests across 3 states, targeting the trafficking network and local corruption. Dalton's on the target list, Harwood confirmed. Federal marshals will handle the arrest personally. They're aware he's armed and potentially dangerous. Rowan found herself unable to settle. She paced the cabin, checked the evidence files repeatedly, jumped at every sound. The waiting was almost worse than the mission itself. Kai noticed her agitation. You okay? I keep thinking something will go wrong. That Dalton will discover what we know. That he'll come here. That's why we're here. 6 network members maintaining watch, all experienced, all armed. Nobody's getting close to this cabin without us knowing, but the worry persisted. Rowan had seen Dalton's face in the photographs. Hard, calculating, dangerous. A man who'd protected traffickers for years wouldn't hesitate to eliminate threats. That afternoon, Buck's radio crackled with an urgent transmission. Eastern position. Vehicle approaching on the access road. Sheriff's SUV, Dalton's inside. The cabin went silent. Then Buck moved into action, coordinating the network with quiet efficiency. All positions, hold concealment. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Mrs. Cade, back room now. Rowan moved quickly, heart pounding. Kai followed, weapon ready. They watched through a partially open door as Buck positioned himself near the front entrance. The SUV pulled up outside. Dalton emerged, tall, fit, mid-50s, wearing his uniform. He approached the cabin confidently and knocked. Buck opened the door. Help you, Sheriff. Buck Tremaine, right? I'm checking on the Cade property. Got a report that Malcolm Cade's widow is staying here alone. Just wanted to make sure everything's okay. His voice was friendly, concerned. But his eyes moved constantly, assessing. Mrs. Cade is fine, settling her late husband's affairs. Appreciate your concern, Sheriff. Mind if I come in? Just want to introduce myself. Let her know local law enforcement is available if she needs anything. She's resting right now. Long day. I'll let her know you stopped by. Dalton's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're staying here too. You and Malcolm were friends? We knew each other. I'm helping Mrs. Cade with the property. How many others are helping? Dalton's tone stayed casual, but the question was pointed. Just me and another friend. Why? No reason. Just noticed some activity up here. Wanted to make sure everything's legitimate. All legitimate, Sheriff. Appreciate you checking. Dalton stood there a moment longer, clearly wanting to push further, but unable to justify it. Finally, he handed Buck a business card. Have Mrs. Cade call me if she needs anything. Anything at all. After he left, Buck watched until the SUV disappeared. Then he radioed, all positions maintain alert. He knows something's off. Rowan emerged from the back room, shaking. He came to see if I had evidence, probably. He's rattled by the trafficking operation getting shut down. Trying to figure out what went wrong, whether his involvement was documented. Buck checked his weapon. We increase security tonight? He might come back. Vincent started monitoring police radio frequencies. Dalton's calling in extra patrols in this area. He's using official resources to watch the cabin. Can he do that? Rowan asked. He's the sheriff. He can justify almost anything as legitimate law enforcement activity. Vincent's face was grim. He's probing our defenses. That night, the network maintained full watch. 2 people on patrol at all times, others resting in shifts, ready to respond. Rowan couldn't sleep. She lay in Malcolm's bed, listening to quiet voices on the radio, feeling the weight of danger pressing close. She thought about Malcolm's recordings, his final messages to her. He'd known his work was dangerous. He'd accepted those risks. Now she was living them, understanding viscerally what he'd experienced for years. Around midnight, movement was detected on the northern approach. Network members responded immediately, coordinating silently in the darkness. Rowan listened to the radio chatter, tense and afraid. False alarm, Kai reported eventually. Elk herd passing through. No human activity, but the incident reminded everyone how exposed they were. Dalton had resources, authority, and desperation. If he decided to move against them, they'd be defending a remote cabin against a corrupt law enforcement official who could justify almost any action. Morning of the 3rd day arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Harwood called at dawn. Federal operation launches in 6 hours. Coordinated arrests at 1400 hours. Dalton will be taken into custody at his office. State police are assisting to prevent his deputies from interfering. 6 more hours, Rowan said, after relaying the information to the network. We can hold, Buck assured her. Dalton's running out of time and he knows it. If he was going to move directly against us, he would have done it last night, but the morning felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong, that Dalton would make one final play. That violence was coming. She was right. At 1100 hours, Vincent picked up radio chatter. Dalton was mobilizing deputies, claiming there was a dangerous situation at the Cade property requiring immediate law enforcement response. He's coming, Vincent announced. Multiple units. He's using his authority to justify raiding the cabin. How long? Buck asked. 20 minutes. Maybe less. The network moved into defensive positions, but they were civilians facing armed law enforcement, albeit corrupt law enforcement. Actual confrontation could result in casualties and might even give Dalton justification for whatever he did. Buck made a quick decision. We evacuate Mrs. Cade. Now, get her and the evidence out of here before Dalton arrives. Let him raid an empty cabin while we wait for federal authorities to arrest him. Kai grabbed Rowan. Pack essentials. 2 minutes. We're leaving. Rowan moved fast, throwing critical items into a backpack, USB drives with evidence, Malcolm's key journals, essential gear. Kai hustled her out the back, while Buck and others prepared to face Dalton's deputies. They moved quickly through the forest, following escape routes Malcolm had established. Behind them, they heard vehicles arriving at the cabin, multiple units, officers shouting, the chaos of a raid. Kai kept Rowan moving. They'll search the cabin, find nothing critical, have to leave. Dalton can't justify holding position once federal authorities arrest him. We just need to stay clear for another few hours. They reached a secondary position a mile from the cabin, another of Malcolm's caches, concealed and secure. From there, they waited and listened to radio reports. Buck's voice came through. Dalton's tearing the cabin apart, looking for evidence. He knows something's here, but he can't find it. Because it's with me, Rowan said, touching the backpack. Exactly where Malcolm wanted it, Kai replied. They waited through the longest 3 hours of Rowan's life. Watched the sun track across the sky. Listened to radio chatter. Held the evidence that would bring down a corrupt official and expose the infrastructure supporting human trafficking. Finally, at precisely 1400 hours, Harwood's voice came through on the burner phone. Federal operation is go. All targets are being taken into custody, including Sheriff Marcus Dalton. Rowan closed her eyes in relief. It was done. Malcolm's final investigation had reached its conclusion. Justice, delayed by his death, had finally arrived. The arrest happened precisely as planned. Federal marshals entered Dalton's office with warrants and overwhelming force. The sheriff, surrounded and outmaneuvered, surrendered without resistance. His deputies, caught completely off guard, could only watch as their boss was taken into custody. Rowan listened to Harwood's report from the secondary position, Kai beside her. Dalton's in federal custody. Charges include conspiracy to facilitate human trafficking, obstruction of justice, corruption, and a dozen other counts. The evidence you and Malcolm gathered is ironclad. What about the deputies at the cabin? State police are handling it. Once word spread about Dalton's arrest, his deputies abandoned the cabin and returned to headquarters. You're clear to return. But Rowan sat there for a long moment, not quite believing it was over. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a grieving widow in Oregon, knowing nothing of Malcolm's secret work. Now she was sitting in a Montana forest, having helped bring down a corrupt sheriff and dismantle a trafficking operation. You okay? Kai asked. I don't know. I feel... Rowan searched for words. Exhausted, relieved, proud, angry. Everything at once. That's about right for this kind of work. Come on, let's go home. They hiked back to the cabin through afternoon light. Other network members were already there, assessing damage from Dalton's raid. The sheriff had torn through Malcolm's possessions looking for evidence. Drawers emptied, files scattered, furniture overturned. Buck surveyed the mess with disgust. Desperate man making desperate moves. But he didn't find what he was looking for. Because we got it out in time, Rowan said, setting down her backpack with its precious cargo. They spent the evening cleaning and organizing. The damage was superficial, nothing destroyed, just disrupted. Malcolm's cabin had weathered worse. Vincent monitored news reports. The story was breaking across regional media. Major trafficking operation dismantled. Corrupt sheriff arrested. Federal investigations spanning multiple states. Details were limited, but the scope was clear. This was significant. They're not mentioning the network, Vincent noted. Harwood's keeping us out of the official narrative. That's good. We work better in the shadows. Rowan thought about that. All these people who'd dedicated years to fighting trafficking, who'd taken real risks, who'd made a measurable difference. And they'd remain anonymous, their contributions known only to federal authorities who'd acted on their intelligence. Malcolm would have wanted it that way, Buck said, reading her expression. He never cared about recognition. He cared about results. As darkness fell, the network members began departing, back to their own positions, their own lives, until only Buck and Kai remained with Rowan. What happens now? Rowan asked. Federal investigation continues, Buck said. They'll be interviewing witnesses, building additional cases, tracking down everyone connected to the operation. We'll provide whatever assistance they need, testimony, documentation, technical support. But the heavy lifting is done, and the network continues. This was one operation, but there are others. Different corridors, different threats. The wilderness is vast and under-patrolled. We're still needed, Kai added. The work doesn't stop just because we had a victory. That's something Malcolm understood. This isn't about winning once. It's about maintaining constant vigilance. After they left, Rowan stood in the cabin Malcolm had built, surrounded by his life's work. The journals, the maps, the equipment, all of it testimony to years of dedication. She picked up the photograph from his desk, studied his face. You did it, she whispered. Your final investigation succeeded. Dalton's going to prison. The trafficking operation is shut down. You finished what you started, but Malcolm couldn't hear her. He was gone. His mission completed posthumously through her efforts and the network he'd built. Rowan felt the complexity of her emotions settling into something like acceptance. Malcolm had lied to her, kept monumental secrets, chosen his mission over transparency. That still hurt, probably always would, but he'd also built something remarkable. A network of dedicated people fighting real evil in places where no one else was paying attention. He'd saved lives, dozens of them, maybe more. He'd trained others to continue the work after he was gone. He documented evidence that brought down corruption and dismantled a trafficking operation. His choices had cost their marriage some of its intimacy. But those same choices had given vulnerable people a chance at freedom. How did you weigh that moral equation? Rowan still wasn't sure. Maybe there was no clear answer. Maybe complicated was okay, as Buck had said. Maybe Malcolm could be both the husband who'd betrayed her trust and the man who dedicated his final years to protecting the helpless. The phone rang, Tenley calling. Rowan answered, suddenly desperate to hear her daughter's voice. "Mom? I saw the news. Something about a sheriff being arrested in Montana. Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Better than fine, actually. "Did Dad, was he involved with whatever happened?" "Yes, he was. I'll explain everything when I see you, but Tenley, your father was doing something important up here. Something that mattered. I'm finally understanding who he really was." Silence on the line. "Then I want to understand too. Can I visit? Soon, please. Come in spring when the roads are clear. I'll show you the cabin, introduce you to the people who knew your father's work. Help you see what I'm seeing." They talked for an hour, the longest conversation they'd had in years. Grief and secrets were giving way to honest communication, creating space for their relationship to heal. After hanging up, Rowan walked outside into the cold night. Stars blazed overhead, the Milky Way visible in ways it never was in the city. The wilderness surrounded her, vast, silent, indifferent to human drama, but not entirely indifferent. Because people like Malcolm and his network paid attention here. They watched the empty places, documented what happened in the shadows, provided the eyes and ears that allowed justice to reach even remote corners. Rowan thought about the people who'd been rescued from the trafficking operation. She'd never meet them, never know their names, never hear their stories. But they were free now, saved because someone had been watching, because someone had cared enough to document and report. 73 lives Malcolm had helped save over the years. Now more, thanks to this final operation. The numbers would keep growing as federal authorities dismantled the trafficking network. Standing under those stars, Rowan made a decision. She wasn't ready to leave yet. Maybe not for a long time. The cabin felt like home in ways her Oregon apartment never had. The work Malcolm had started felt unfinished, not the Dalton investigation, but the broader mission of maintaining watch. She thought she might stay through winter, learning the network's operations more fully, learning Malcolm's surveillance techniques, his documentation methods, his strategic thinking, finding her own role in the community he'd built. Maybe she'd return to Oregon eventually. Or maybe she'd become what Malcolm had been, a permanent watcher in the wilderness, paying attention where attention mattered. She'd have to figure it out. But for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. The next morning brought media attention. Reporters had identified the remote Montana cabin associated with the investigation. Several tried calling. A few even attempted driving up the access road. Buck helped Rowan deflect them. "No comment. Mrs. Cade is grieving her husband and settling his affairs. She has nothing to add to the official investigation." The reporters eventually left, frustrated but unable to justify harassing a widow. The story would play out in courts and official statements, not through her words, Harwood called with an update. Dalton's talking, trying to cut a deal by providing information on the trafficking network. Federal prosecutors are listening, but he's looking at serious time regardless. The evidence you and Malcolm gathered is too strong. How many people did his corruption enable to be trafficked? We may never know the full number, But based on Malcolm's documentation and what we've learned from the current investigation, dozens at minimum. Maybe more over the years. Harwood paused. Your husband's work mattered, Mrs. Cade. Never doubt that. After the call, Rowan found herself back in Malcolm's journals, reading his account of discovering Dalton's corruption. The moment Malcolm had realized someone local was protecting traffickers. His careful investigation, building evidence piece by piece. His frustration at dying before he could complete the case. One entry stood out. If I don't finish this, Rowan will find my notes and have to decide what to do. That's not fair to her, but I trust her to make the right choice. She's always been stronger and braver than she believed. If she reads this, Rowan, I'm sorry for the burden, but I also know you can handle it. You always could. Tears blurred the words. Malcolm had known he was dying, known he was leaving her with impossible choices, and trusted her anyway. She'd been so angry about his secrets. But reading these entries now, understanding his thoughts, she felt the anger transforming into something else. Not quite forgiveness, but understanding. Acceptance of who Malcolm had been, complicated, flawed, dedicated, and ultimately trying to do what he thought was right. That afternoon, several network members arrived for what Buck called a mission debrief. They sat around the cabin, Buck, Kai, Vincent, Teresa, and 3 others, reviewing what had happened and planning next steps. The trafficking corridor is disrupted, but not eliminated, Vincent explained, pointing to maps. The organization will try to re-establish operations eventually. We need to maintain watch, document any attempts to rebuild. What about Dalton's replacement? Kai asked. The county needs a new sheriff. How do we ensure whoever takes over isn't also compromised? Federal authorities are vetting candidates thoroughly, Buck said. They're aware the position had been corrupted. New sheriff will be clean, we hope. But we verify through our own channels regardless. They discussed rotation schedules, observation protocols, communication procedures. The work continued, as Buck had said it would. One victory didn't mean the mission was complete. Rowan listened, absorbing the dedication these people brought to the work. They weren't professionals. They were retirees and locals, and people who'd chosen to care. But they operated with professionalism and commitment that would rival any official organization. What about you, Mrs. Cade? Teresa asked. Are you planning to stay involved with the network? All eyes turned to Rowan. She felt the weight of the question, the implications of her answer. I'm still figuring that out, she said honestly. A month ago, I didn't know this network existed. Now I've completed one of Malcolm's missions and helped bring down a corrupt sheriff. It's a lot to process. Take your time, Buck said. Network's here whenever you're ready. Or if you decide it's not for you, we understand that too. But even as he said it, Rowan knew she wasn't walking away. Not completely. Malcolm had built something too important, and she'd seen too much to simply return to her old life and pretend the wilderness didn't hide desperate situations needing attention. I think I'll stay through winter, she said. Learn more about the operations, find where I fit. See if there's a role for me here. Smiles around the table. These people had known Malcolm, respected him, and now they were welcoming her into the work he'd loved. The meeting continued, but Rowan's mind drifted. She thought about her life in Oregon, safe, comfortable, predictable. She thought about this new life in Montana, challenging, purposeful. Dangerous. She thought about who she'd been before Malcolm died, and who she was becoming now. The cabin around her felt alive with Malcolm's presence, not haunted, but inhabited by the legacy he'd built. Every map on the wall, every file in the cabinet, every journal entry represented hours of dedication to something larger than himself. Rowan had spent 37 years as Malcolm's wife. Maybe she'd spend the next phase of her life as the keeper of his mission, continuing the work he'd started, honoring him by protecting the vulnerable people he'd dedicated his final years to helping. It felt right. Complicated and difficult, but right. As the network members prepared to leave, Buck pulled Rowan aside. Malcolm would be proud of you. What you did, completing his mission, gathering the evidence that brought down Dalton, keeping the network operational through a dangerous situation. That took real courage. I was terrified the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action despite fear. You did what needed doing, even when you were scared. That's exactly what Malcolm did for 15 years. After everyone left, Rowan stood at the window watching darkness claim the forest. The wilderness stretched endlessly, beautiful and dangerous, hiding both suffering and those who fought against it. She picked up her phone and called Gail. "I'm staying," she said when her friend answered. "Not forever, maybe, but for now. There's work here that matters, and I think I need to be part of it." "Are you sure? Montana's a long way from home. Maybe Montana's home now. I don't know. But I need to find out. Then I support you. Just be careful. And call me often. I worry. I will. Thank you for understanding. I don't understand, not really. But I trust you to know what you need." That night, Rowan started her own journal. Not Malcolm's words, but her own. Recording her thoughts, her feelings, her transformation from grieving widow to active member of a network fighting trafficking. She wrote about the anger and betrayal she'd felt discovering Malcolm's secrets, about the growing understanding as she'd read his journals and met his network, about the terror and exhilaration of completing his final mission, and she wrote about choice, how Malcolm had chosen his mission over transparency, how she'd chosen to complete his work rather than walk away, how those choices defined them, complicated them, made them more than they'd been before. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and persistent, covering the wilderness in white. The cabin was warm, secure, purposeful. Rowan Cade was home. Spring came slowly to the Montana mountains. Snow receded inch by inch, revealing the land Malcolm had loved. Rowan watched the transformation from the cabin windows. Ice melting, streams running full, the first green shoots pushing through thaw-softened earth. She'd stayed through the winter, as promised, learned the network's operations, studied Malcolm's surveillance techniques, found her role in the organization he'd built. She wasn't as mobile as the younger members. Her knees reminded her of that daily, but she'd discovered other skills. She was good with documentation, with organizing the intelligence the network gathered, with maintaining the communication systems that held everything together. Vincent had started calling her home base. When field observers radioed in reports, Rowan received them, logged them, analyzed them for patterns. When federal authorities needed clarification on historical intelligence, she accessed Malcolm's carefully organized files. She'd become the institutional memory of the network, the keeper of 15 years of accumulated knowledge. It felt right, like she'd found purpose she didn't know she'd been missing. The legal proceedings against Dalton and the trafficking network continued. Federal prosecutors had built comprehensive cases using the evidence Malcolm and Rowan had gathered. Trials would take months, maybe years, but the outcomes seemed certain. The sheriff who'd protected traffickers would spend decades in prison. More importantly, the trafficking corridor through the Bitterroot Mountains had been disrupted. Organizations that had operated with impunity now knew someone was watching. The wilderness wasn't as safe for predators anymore. The official count of lives impacted by network intelligence had grown. 87 now. 14 more people rescued in operations stemming from Malcolm's documentation. Each number represented a person who'd been saved from trafficking, slavery, or death. Rowan kept a page in her journal with that count, updating it as reports came in. 87 lives. Malcolm had given everything for this work, and the numbers kept growing even after his death. Tenley visited in early May, driving up when roads finally cleared. Rowan watched her daughter emerge from her rental car, looking uncertain and young, despite being 35. "This is it?" Tenley asked, studying the cabin. "This is where Dad spent all that time?" "This is it. Come inside. There's a lot to show you." They spent 3 days together, the longest uninterrupted time they'd had in years. Rowan showed Tenley everything, the journals, the maps, the operational files. She explained the network, introduced her to Buck and Kai and Vincent, walked her through the work Malcolm had dedicated himself to. Tenley read her father's journal entries in silence, tears streaming down her face. "He wrote about me, about being proud of me, about wishing he could be more present in my life. He loved you completely." The secrets weren't about not loving us. They were about, Rowan struggled for words, about him trying to protect us while doing something he believed mattered desperately. But it cost you both. Cost all of us. Yes, it did. And I don't know if that was the right choice. But it was his choice, and I'm trying to understand rather than just condemn. They talked honestly for the first time in years about Malcolm, about the distance that had grown in their family, about hurt and disappointment and love that persisted despite everything. The conversations were difficult, but healing. On Tenley's last night, they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching stars emerge. The wilderness surrounded them, quiet and vast. "Are you staying here?" Tenley asked. "Permanently? I don't know. I'm taking it season by season. For now, yes. This feels important. Like I'm finishing something Dad started while also discovering something about myself. You seem different, stronger, more certain. I feel different. Like I've found purpose I didn't have before. Does that make sense?" "Yeah, it does." Tenley was quiet for a moment. "I'm angry at Dad for the lies, but I'm also proud of what he did. Is that contradictory?" "If it is, we're both contradictory. I feel the same way." Tenley left the next morning with promises to visit again, to call regularly, to work on rebuilding their relationship. The distance between them had been acknowledged and could now begin to heal. After her daughter left, Rowan spent a week organizing files. Federal authorities had requested copies of certain historical documentation for ongoing investigations. She prepared comprehensive packages, ensuring everything was properly indexed and explained. The work was satisfying in ways her library job had never been. She was contributing to something tangible, using skills she'd developed to support a mission that saved lives. Gail visited in June, curious about the life Rowan had described over months of phone calls. She stayed 3 days, meeting network members, touring the cabin, trying to understand what had captured her friend. "It's not what I expected," Gail admitted. "I thought you'd be living in isolation, obsessing over your dead husband's secrets. But it's a community, a purpose. That's exactly what it is. Malcolm built something remarkable here, and I get to be part of it. Are you happy?" Rowan considered the question. "I'm not sure happy is the right word. I'm purposeful, connected, engaged in ways I haven't been in years. Maybe that's better than happy." Summer brought warm days and wildflowers. Rowan maintained the cabin, organized files, coordinated network communications. She hiked the nearby trails, learning the land Malcolm had loved. She read his journals repeatedly, discovering new layers in his words with each reading. She started writing letters to Malcolm, one-sided conversations she'd never send, but needed to write, telling him about completing his mission, about bringing down Dalton, about joining the network, about the daughter whose relationship was healing, sharing her thoughts about forgiveness and understanding and love that persisted despite betrayal. The letters helped her process the complicated grief that still arose unexpectedly. Malcolm had been gone 6 months now, and she still missed him. Missed the man she'd thought he was and the man she'd discovered he'd been. But the missing was changing, becoming less sharp. The anger was transforming into acceptance. She couldn't forgive everything. The lies still hurt, the lost years still ached. But she could honor what he'd built while acknowledging the cost. In late July, Harwood visited in person for the first time. The retired colonel was older than Rowan had imagined. 76, weathered, carrying himself with military bearing softened by years. They sat on the cabin porch, drinking coffee, talking about Malcolm. "He was one of the best intelligence analysts I ever worked with," Harwood said. "Could see patterns others missed, connect disparate data points, think 3 steps ahead. When he told me he was building a civilian surveillance network in Montana, I knew it would be exceptional." "Were you worried about him? The risks he was taking?" "Constantly. But Malcolm was committed. Once he decided something needed doing, you couldn't dissuade him. The best I could do was provide support, guidance, connections to federal authorities who could act on his intelligence." "Did you know his heart was failing?" "He told me 6 months before he died. said he had limited time and wanted to complete one final investigation. The Dalton case. I tried to talk him out of it, told him to rest, spend his remaining time with you. But he couldn't stop, Rowan finished. The mission came first, yes, and because of that choice, because he completed that investigation, even though it cost him his life, 87 people have been saved. How do you weigh that? A man's life and his family's peace against dozens of victims rescued? I don't know. I still don't know. They sat in silence, contemplating impossible moral equations that had no clear answers. Before Harwood left, he handed Rowan an envelope. This arrived at my office. It's from the State Department. Some of the trafficking victims your network helped rescue wanted to express gratitude. They don't know your names. We kept the network anonymous, but they know someone was watching. Someone helped save them. Inside were letters. Brief, heartfelt, written in halting English or translated from other languages. Thank you notes from people who'd been trafficked, who'd been freed because someone had documented evidence and reported it to authorities. Rowan read them with tears streaming down her face. These were real people, with names and stories and lives that would have been destroyed if no one had been paying attention. Malcolm never got to read these, she said. He died before the rescue operations happened, but he made them possible. Every life saved came from work he started. That's legacy, Mrs. Cade. That's meaning. After Harwood left, Rowan added the letters to Malcolm's files. Physical proof that the work mattered, that the sacrifices had accomplished something beyond abstract numbers. That evening, she sat at Malcolm's desk and opened a new journal. She'd filled her first one over the winter months. This second volume represented continuation, not just of Malcolm's work, but of her own story, the life she was building in his absence. She wrote about the decision she'd made. She would stay at the cabin indefinitely. Oregon held memories, but Montana held purpose. She'd keep the coastal apartment, visit occasionally, maintain connections there. But this mountain cabin was home now. She'd become what Malcolm had been, a watcher in the wilderness, paying attention where attention mattered. She'd organize intelligence, coordinate communications, support field operatives. She'd honor his legacy by continuing his mission, but she'd also do it her way. She'd maintain closer contact with Tenley, refusing to let important relationships fray through neglect. She'd be honest with people who mattered, no secrets. She'd balance the mission with personal connections in ways Malcolm hadn't managed. She could honor his work while learning from his mistakes. That seemed like the best way to love him now, accepting who he'd been, complicated and flawed and dedicated, while choosing to be someone slightly different. Outside, night settled over the mountains. The wilderness stretched endlessly, holding suffering and beauty, darkness and light. And in places where no one else was watching, people like Rowan and Malcolm's network maintained their vigil. She picked up her pen and continued writing. Her story, their story, the story of what mattered and why. The mountain held it all, grief and purpose, secrets and truth, endings and beginnings. Rowan Cade, at 62, had finally found where she belonged, not with having all the answers, but with living the questions. Not with Malcolm's secrets erased, but with understanding earned through action and choice. The cabin, once a symbol of unfinished dreams and painful secrets, had become something else. A home, a headquarters, a monument to one man's dedication and one woman's courage to continue his work. Malcolm's legacy lived on through her, through the network, through every person saved by their collective attention. The lies he'd told and the trust he'd broken would always hurt. But the mission he'd built and the lives he'd protected would always matter more. Rowan stood at the window one final time, looking at stars brilliant in mountain darkness. She raised her coffee mug in silent toast, to Malcolm, to the network, to the people they'd saved and would continue saving. Then she returned to her journal, to documenting the day's intelligence, to maintaining the watch that made everything worthwhile. The wilderness was vast and dangerous and beautiful, and Rowan Cade was paying attention, continuing the work her husband had started, honoring his memory by protecting the vulnerable people he'd dedicated his life to helping. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.